I'll talk about SIDS because with the global warming, there's one of the group of countries which will be the most severely impacted. SIDS, as you know, produce the least amount of greenhouse gases, yet they suffer the most from global warming. Whenever the international community manages to control the temperature, we say about 1.5 to 2 degrees C, after that, the SID will continue to suffer from the effect of global warming for decades to come after that. That's why I'm talking about this subject, because it's very important, because I've attended many conferences, and I find that in most cases, SIDS is not on the radar. That's why I'm taking my time to talk on this particular subject today. At the rate we are going, some inhabited small island stands the risk of being completely submerged by the sea if we don't take precaution in the years ahead. What I'll do, I'll use Mauritius as a case study. Mauritius, as you may be aware, is a small island state in the southwest Indian Ocean. It is a pretty small country with a total land surface area of about 2,000 kilometers square, approximately 7 kilometers by 40 kilometers maximum length, maximum breadth. And it has a population of about 1.2 million. For a small island developing state, the challenge that climate change represents is unique. In view of the geographical isolation and exposure, SIDS are highly vulnerable to the impact of climate change. Indeed, this growing concern is being felt in the Republic of Mauritius as several ways of livelihood are being severely affected by the impact of global warming. This is further exacerbated as we are influenced by large ocean atmospheric interaction, and we are located along the path of tropical cyclones. The impact of accelerated climate change on tropical cyclones and the sea level rise is leading to more threatening and unpredictable situation. The paradox is even more inconceivable. SIDS are insignificant emitters of greenhouse gases, and yet they are the most at risk to the impact of climate change. The Mauritius Meteorological Station, the MMS, has been conducting studies and monitoring the different meteorological climate elements that indicate how the climate is changing over time with the data available from the 1950s. According to the MMS, that is Mauritius Meteorological Station, the mean annual temperature has warmed by about 1.39 degrees C in the last 70 years. That is from 1951 to 2020. Similar to global trends, the warming atmosphere has without any doubt impacted the hydrological cycle over the southwest Indian Ocean area, and obviously on the rainfall pattern as well. Time series over the past 70 years, again 1951 to 2020, has shown a decrease of 104 millimeters of rainfall in the annual rainfall over Mauritius for the last 70 years. The observed trend on sea level measured in Mauritius showed a mean rise of 4.7 millimeters per year for the period 1987 to 2020. Compared to decade 1991 to 2000, the mean sea level has increased by 11.9 centimeters during the last decade, that is 2011 to 2020. According to the IPCC, the global mean sea level will continue to rise across most of the region, across the globe. This is of particular concern to the Republic of Mauritius, where islands like Saint Brandon and Agalega, which are about 1.5 kilometers square and 70 kilometers square in area respectively, are only about 2 meters above the sea mean sea level at their highest point. I repeat, about only 2 meters above the mean sea level. With regard to tropical cyclones, there is no convincing evidence signaling in an increase in the number of storms in the Southwest Indian Ocean basin. However, there is an increasing trend in the number of storms reaching tropical cyclone strengths, wind above 165 kilometers per hour or higher. Furthermore, the anticipated rapid or even explosive intensification of tropical storm has asserted itself in the last few years. During the last decade, almost every season has witnessed at least one rapidly or explosive intensification as far as cyclone is concerned. The latest and the 6th assessment report of the IPCC state with high confidence that surface temperature will continue to increase, and as the best possible shared economic, socio-economic pathway, global warming of 1.5 to 2 degrees C will be exceeded during the 21st century unless deep reduction in CO2 emission and other greenhouse gases emission are implemented in the coming decades. Mauritius is classified as a high-risk index country together with a very high exposure to disasters. In its 2021 World Risk Report, Mauritius has now become the 53rd country with the highest disaster risk as compared to 2020 ranking, whereby we were ranked 51st country. In March 2013, the capital city of Port Louis experienced one of the worst floods in its history, with 11 people died. In fact, this was a wake-up call for Mauritius. Consequently, the government highlighted the need for a permanent disaster management structure in Mauritius, which resulted in the creation of the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Center in October 2013. The center acts as a main institution in Mauritius for coordinating and monitoring of disaster risk reduction and management activities. Since 2015, Mauritius has adopted the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, thus helping us to shift from managing disasters to managing and reducing disasters risk. The Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction 2015-2030 outlines 7 clear targets and 4 priorities for action to prevent new and to reduce existing disaster risk. These include understanding disaster risk, strengthening disaster risk governance to manage disaster risk, investing in disaster reduction for resilience, and enhancing disaster preparedness for effective response and to build back better in recovery, rehabilitation, and reconstruction. Other measures taken by the National Disaster Center to work toward strengthening of resilience of our society. Firstly, the formulation of a national disaster risk reduction and management policy, strategy, framework, and action plan 2020 to 2030. The document aligns with the Sendai Framework Agreement and provides for the necessary policy guidelines for the whole of institution and whole of society, coordinated as well as harmonized approach to further strengthen our resilience to increase risk due to climate change. It provides detailed measures to be initiated by stakeholders over the next 10 years. This national strategic framework is for use by all ministries and departments at national and subnational level, while also engaging the communities, the civil society, development partners, and the private sector. Secondly, a community disaster response program, which aims to train and equip teams of volunteers from vulnerable areas to respond to crisis situation or imminent disaster, to take life-saving measures, provide immediate assistance to victims pending the arrival of the first responders, and to give critical support to the first responders as well. That's number 2. Thirdly, the Capacity to Disaster Reduction Initiative, the KGD partnership. The KGD partnership is a global UN-led partnership that works toward strengthening countries' capacity to pursue integrated and coherent solutions to reduce disaster and climate risk across the Sustainable Development Goals. A scoping mission was undertaken by the KGD team in February 2019. During the scoping mission, within the government institution and partners, 10 priority sectors were identified to reduce exposure and vulnerability to disaster risk. There are agriculture and food security, including fisheries, climate services, education, environment, health, infrastructure, very important, urban planning, water resource management, and two cross-cutting sectors which are human mobility, including relocation of people where there is landslide, and tourism, which is the main industry in Mauritius. Fourthly, coagulation for disaster-resilient infrastructures. The CDRI was officially launched by the Prime Minister of India as a United Nations Climate Action Summit in New York on the 23rd of September 2019. As I mentioned yesterday, in Mauritius we only have one seaport and one airport. Therefore, there is a need to make this critical infrastructure climate and disaster resilient. Infrastructure deficit, both in terms of quantity and quality, has been a major global barrier on the pathway to sustainable development. Increasing disaster and climate risk is putting additional stress on the existing infrastructure and widening the infrastructure deficit. With a view to safeguarding the hard-earned economic gains and protecting our environmental and economic assets, support are needed for the following priorities. Implementation of the land drainage master plan to cover the whole island, to protect people's lives and livelihood. Implementation of coastal protection work to protect our beaches and the tourism industry, which I just mentioned earlier. The tourist industry is the main income earner in Mauritius. And now, with the rising sea level, that's encroaching on the beach, and is creating a lot of havoc. Protection of Port Louis, the port city of Port Louis, which is the sole, I mentioned, the sole port in Mauritius. Protection and conservation of both terrestrial and marine ecosystem. Mauritius biodiversity is among the most threatened in the world. According to the National Biodiversity Strategy Action Plan 2017-2025, over 100 species of plants and animals have become extinct, and many more are threatened. And lastly, to address the issue of food and water security, naturally through smart agriculture. To ensure decarbonization of the economy through a just and fair transition, Mauritius has set a realistic mitigation target with unconditional and conditional commitment in its updated nationally determined contribution. In this updated NDC, submitted to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in October 2021, Mauritius aimed at an enhanced mitigation target of 40% greenhouse gas emission reduction by 2030. This target is much more ambitious as compared to the 30% of greenhouse gas emission targeted in our first NDC submitted by Mauritius in 2015. This new target is based on government decision, including his revised renewable energy target of 60% by 2030, reflected in the Renewable Energy Roadmap 2030, phasing out of coal for electricity production by 2030, and a biomass framework which is currently under formulation. The total financial needs for implementing the updated NDC submitted in 2021 are estimated at $6.5 billion USD, about $4.5 USD for adaptation and $2 billion for mitigation. Mauritius has committed to implement 35% of the NDC measures through government expenditures and funding from the private sector in key sectors, including the energy sector. The remaining 65% amount to about 4.2 billion USD, represents a conditional commitment and will be dependent on funding that will be made available by funding institutions, donor agency, and friendly countries. It should also be pointed out that for the full implementation of the NDC, the following systemic challenges need to be addressed. Firstly, climate finance should be considerably scaled up, in line with the decision taken at COP26. Capacity of seeds to access climate finance should be enhanced. Very important. A major challenge is a lack of capacity in seed countries to formulate project, proposal, and concept note that match the requirement and specificities of funding institutions, such as the Green Climate Fund and the Global Environment Fund. The lack of capacity of key stakeholders to carry out vulnerability assessment in key impacted sectors. Science-based assessment is important to devise appropriate adaptation measures. Lack of capacity building in natural capital accounting and downscaling of the impact of climate change are such examples. The Republic of Mauritius is therefore proposing the following action at regional, continental, and global level. Firstly, the international committee should urgently increase effort toward decreasing greenhouse gases emission. Seeds will continue to suffer for decades, as I mentioned earlier, even after stabilization of emission. Comprehensive package of immediate climate change adaptation and mitigation action. Build resilience against weather and climate extremes with appropriate technology transfer. Benefit from funding to implement projects enhancing capabilities in the accuracy of early warning system and uptake of climate services, and to fully benefit from continental and regional projects as well. As most small island developing states, Mauritius is highly vulnerable to the effect of climate change and has limited natural resources, which are under constant pressure and strain to satisfy the increasing socioeconomic development needs. The limited fiscal space for government to finance expensive climate adaptation and mitigation projects is a crucial issue, given that the debt to GDP ratio is estimated at 78% for the financial year 22-23. The limited tax base is a constraint to mobilize economic revenue. And given its openness, Mauritius remains highly vulnerable to external economic shock and trade imbalance. Mauritius has been trying to finance about 35% of the budget to deal with the disaster management. But much international support will be required by Mauritius to make the transition toward a low-carbon development path through greater utilization of renewable sources such as biomass, solar, and wind, and to adapt to the negative impact of climate change that affects several sectors of the economy, especially with recurrent flooding and coastal erosion. Before I resume my seat, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to quote from the latest IMF report on Mauritius published in July 2022, that is last month. Climate change has become a growing concern in Mauritius. If unaddressed, climate shock risks disrupting Mauritius' quest for social and economic resilience. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your kind attention.